to be incorporated into the size of the parcel for density purposes, and that's also been used in this case.
So the open space is allowed to be considered if it's a dedicated park. Question. That's a question.
That's correct, Commissioner Stein.
Okay. Sort of as a general comment, I do support Livermore building a variety of housing types, including affordable. I also like inclusionary housing, and I have a concern, a longer term concern, that as with homelessness, Livermore not become the go-to place in the valley. And I do have a question, I guess, for staff or perhaps the developer as to how low and very low housing is distributed among the various cities. I mean, we started out with homelessness, with, providing services and the social services, the open hearth kitchen, and we actually, have become sort of the center of homelessness in the valley. And I don't want that to happen with affordable housing, much as it's needed. I think, we need to do our fair share, but we don't need to do the entire valley's fair share. That was
sure. I can start with that, and then perhaps our Housing and Human Services manager and staff as well, Assistant Community Development Director Eric Uranga and our Housing Services Manager Fran Reiser can weigh in. But we do have allocations for a variety of income levels from our state mandated regional housing needs allocation, and like our neighbors to the west fall short of building those number of units. But I will say that and we do have some numbers on that actually the recent construction across the 3 jurisdictions is actually very similar in terms of number of units that are in the pipeline or being constructed. And Mr. Reisner or Eric, I don't know if you have any more information on that.
Yes, I'd like to add, this is Eric Uranga. I am Assistant Community Development Director, and I oversee the Housing and Human Services Division for the city. In terms of affordable housing, supply and demand in the Tri-Valley, it is true that Livermore has developed more affordable housing than its immediate neighbors, but Pleasanton and Dublin also have in the past done some projects. I think that most important note is that Livermore has a preference on its projects where Livermore residents get a preference to occupy these units before others.
So perhaps to expand on that, how will Eden Housing ensure that Livermore residents have first preference on this project?
So we will be employing a priority point system when it comes to leasing, and so applicants will receive point based on living in Livermore already and working in Livermore already. So that will be a dynamic in our process.
I'm sorry, I couldn't understand that. Perhaps someone can interpret.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. Matt, you're still having some feedback issues. If anybody else.
So this is Linda from Eden. I can speak to that. We're going to have a preference system, a point system that would give points for both living and working in Livermore. So we have to comply with fair housing law, but we do have a structure to create a preference pool for people who live and work in Livermore.
Okay. Another question on page 8, it says that basically the traffic at the intersections at Railroad and L and Railroad and Livermore meet the general plan standards. What are those standards and how close are we to not meeting them? I think Bob Vinn would probably know that. And also probably another highly impacted intersection is the one at First and L because of the driveway.
This is Bob Vinn, your city engineer. The project generates very little traffic relative to the amount of traffic already at the intersections, and really doesn't move the needle much. As far as what the city standard is, it's typically mid-level of service D at most intersections around town. We have no level of service standard for the intersections in the downtown core, but we study them nonetheless. And like I said, this particular project generates, far fewer trips, for example, than the shopping center that used to sit on the site.
Right, but we've also got a general plan that allows for something in the neighborhood of 3,000 more units downtown. And so each one is incremental, but what are the current levels of service?
If you hang on a second, I will get that information from the traffic study that was done and report it back.
While he's doing that, I do have a question for the developer. Is there any backup? It's an all-electric community. Is there any backup, for example, for the elevators and for heating in the winter in the case that electricity goes out?
So we've been studying the use of battery backup. So our emergency lighting in the hallways has battery backup. We've been actually looking at solar battery backup for our solar system so that we can do storage. But it's mostly for lighting. We have a plan with the residents when we have planned outages to work with them on using stairs, or in the case of PG&E blackouts, we actually prepare the residents and they usually vacate if they know there's going to be a power outage, or they use the stairs.
Okay. Another question is, how will utility costs be distributed? I didn't notice any area where there are separate meters for utilities like water, electricity, HVAC.
Kevin, you want to take that one?
Hi, this is Kevin Lenker with Eden Housing. We're still determining whether individual residents will have individual meters. There will be a house meter for common areas. We're still finalizing our financing plan, so we still have to figure that part out.
How about the heating and air conditioning? Will there be individual units or?
We do have to still determine whether we will use a state program to assist all of the residents with that, or if we have to use individual meters.
Yeah, the reason I ask is that individual meters tend to encourage conservation. Otherwise, you sort of have the law of the commons where everybody considers it a free resource.
Oh, no, we completely agree. And we have data that supports your position. We just have to figure out exactly how the state financing sources will apply to this project.
Another question is, how will building access be controlled?
We'll have manned front desks during the daytime, and then fob access and security cameras in the evenings.
Will there be card access or key access or?
Yes, sorry, fob access is equivalent to card access.
Okay. Another question is on turnover. How long after a person's income exceeds the maximum level do they have to accumulate first and last month and cleaning deposit?
We can't ask people to leave if they go over income. that's prohibited, if that was the question.
That was the question, essentially, that you don't want people being forced out at.
We are not, yeah, we can't ask them to leave. It's against the rules of the tax credit program that we use. So, so just because you go over income for the program, I mean, you have to qualify when you move in, but if you stay there and your income goes up over time, you can stay with us. We do raise the rent a little bit to provide, because we think it's only fair, but we can't make you leave.
Okay. What percentage of the rent goes to management, and will the rent cover the both payback of the loans and the operation and maintenance? Or if not, are you dependent upon ongoing grants?
So we have to structure our financing so that we can service the debt that we'll be borrowing for the projects, and then there's some residuals after that. So we have to have a certain percentage. And I don't, off the top of my head, know the actual percentage for property management, but most of our costs are structured to pay for the operating costs of the property. So the staff that will be there, the utilities that we pay for, other amenities, our services programming. So we have a budget that covers all of that work. And then we have to cover our debt by a minimum ratio of 1.15 for most of our lenders. So we'll have some residual after that, but we have to pay the first mortgage back on a regular basis. So our tenants have to pay rent.
Oh, no, I meant that the rent cover.
Oh, yeah, it covers. We don't go grant. We don't fundraise for operating expenses. We might fundraise for special services programs, but we don't fundraise for regular operating costs.
And is there any sort of a backup plan when the parking spills over? I mean, I'm almost certain it will, in spite of all the studies, because I live next to an apartment complex. And I drive by apartment complexes, and they're, at the current rate of parking, and they overflow. And then there's also the service vehicles. A lot of the lower income residents drive their business vehicle home, and you see a lot of pickups and vans. And in the case of the project that I live next to, box trucks, dump trucks, hearses, just about everything, landscape trailers. And so there's quite a bit of impact of that parking impact. And is there any sort of backup? Is there another lot you can rent, or some office you can come to an agreement for parking on evenings and weekends? Or
it's been our experience that a lot of our residents don't try not to own too many cars. And I think one of the reasons we're trying to locate in the downtown is because we're trying to serve downtown workers so that they don't actually have to own a car. We've been increasingly moving to lower parking standards, and we work on parking management with our tenants. Sometimes we give incentives for folks with fewer cars. So for sure, we do a lot of parking management. We feel comfortable with the ratios at 1-to-1, which is where we are now. And given all the downtown garage space, we think that this will be fine.
I also want to add that that's consistent with our past experience with some of the affordable projects. A little bit different with the senior project at Heritage Estates, but also with a project at Chestnut Square. So that, in combination with Eden's experience and the backup they provided as part of the staff analysis, are the basis for our support as well.
We're also working with city staff to get bus passes for our residents so that they will use transit more. A lot of our tenants are highly reliant on transit. So
question, I guess, the Chestnut Square, does that have any 2-3 bedroom apartments in it?
Hello, yes, this is Eric Uranga. Yes, Chestnut Square does have 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units.
Okay. I think that's all of my questions. And I guess my comments are the downtown plan has sort of evolved over time. Originally, the Lucky Center went in the early 80s and was torn down in the 2000s. But the overriding reason why the city bought the project and didn't let it continue as commercial was that the regional theater outgrew the Mills Park site. And the goal was to provide a regional theater and then somewhere in the neighborhood of 3,500 residential units downtown to provide the tax increment funding for that residential theater. This site, I think, originally had 450 units on it. And the urban planner who did the downtown, I think it was Michael Freeman, when asked about parks, said that parks are something you get a bus to drive to. There was also the feeling that the downtown would be retail, commercial, and entertainment. He wanted a movie theater and a lot of small shops. The downtown has evolved into a hospitality and entertainment theater. There's still, I think, Karate's Jeweler and Baughman's, but beyond that, there's almost no retail on First Street and very little retail on the balance of the downtown until you get to the southern area around the Safeway. So that's changed. And the comment is that the success of the downtown as a vibrant hospitality and entertainment thing is dependent upon a number of things. One is the small town atmosphere. Another is the infrastructure that's gone in, the fountains and the bluestone sidewalks and the landscaping. But perhaps one of the dominant ones, at least on attracting people from outside of the city, is the abundant parking. And that's the reason I'm basically so concerned about overflow parking. I'm also concerned that if we get a mix of high density housing, it's probably not a problem, but I really don't want to see the downtown become a ghetto of affordable housing. And I support, inclusionary housing, both on a macro and micro scale. I mean, I think it should be distributed throughout the city. And if we see high density housing downtown, it should be market rate with maybe 20% affordable rather than entire affordable. And that probably comes from my early experience with the public housing, where you see some of the failures, the Pink Palace and Cabrini Green and a number of other ones in the New York area where I lived. And my aunt lived in Queens, and I remember as an early teen, one of the big events was when they blew up about a 600-unit apartment complex because it became unfeasible to continue running it. So I'm concerned that we not create a ghetto, basically, of affordable housing. Those are my comments, and I basically I think this is a well-designed project. I like the architecture. I think it does fit in to a large extent with the Mediterranean and Spanish downtown. The only problem I have is with the color palette. It's basically white, and that works in San Bernardino and Santa Barbara. But Livermore is sort of more earth tones. The post office and the Forester's building, which they give as examples, are not white. They're a light tan. The only white building really downtown is St. Michael's and the associated structures around it. And that works for a major landscape, but I'm not sure you want it for an apartment complex. It requires a lot of maintenance. They repaint it probably every 4 or 5 years. They wash it down. And it also stands out. And considering the current climate in Livermore, you may not want this building to stand out. Also with the landscaping, some of the trees close to the building say they're going to spread out 60 feet. And I don't think that will happen if they're, within 10 feet of the building. So perhaps you could look to more columnar trees for the ones that are planted close to the building. Some of the liquid ambers, the sterile ones, can be columnar. There are a number of others, Italian cypress. So I think you need to look at more carefully at the large trees next to the building. Overall, I think it does meet the general plan. My only concern is parking, and for that reason, I probably will not support the design unless there's some sort of a backup for parking.
This is Kevin Leichner from the developer again. I would say that we do have a backup plan for parking. In addition to the one-to-one parking on site, we do have a tentative agreement with the city to lease additional spaces in the downtown parking garage. So I think we are trying to mitigate your concerns.
That even increases my concerns. That means there's less parking for the downtown businesses. I think, to an extent, your project does compensate to some extent because some of the workers will live there and not have to use the public parking. But at the same time, people's jobs change, people's goals change, people's education changes, and you may end up with people who live there not working anywhere near their place of residence, or even being able to get there by public transit, which is what seems to happen over long periods of time around BART stations.
No, we agree with you, Commissioner Stein. People's life circumstances change over time. It's our understanding, and maybe city staff can step in here, but it's our understanding that the parking garage that's planned has potentially more spaces than has additional spaces that could accommodate our housing needs.
Yeah, so I did want to add that, Commissioner Stein, you're not alone in having parking as a concern. That was voted the #1 priority in our downtown outreach over the 2+ years where we did that, and the council heard that and directed us as we developed this site to always maintain at least as much parking as you have now, and to accommodate the new uses that are coming online. And so through the development of the parking resources, both surface lots, the structured parking in both of the garages, we do have a surplus after allocating the Eden spaces in the L Street garage for some of that. So we do still end up with a surplus. So what's that?
What is the surplus?
I don't have the exact numbers. It's right around 20 to 30 spaces based on our current calculations. So we're still designing the striping for the L Street and I Street garages based on the council's approval of the 50% allowed to go to an 8-foot width. Doesn't make sense in some cases to have all your spaces or go up to 50% just because of the layout of columns and corners and utility areas. And so we may end up with more than that, or have an opportunity to gain some there if we want to. But right now, the rough number after allocating to Eden is somewhere between 20 and 30 spaces extra.
Thank you.
And Commissioner Stein, this is Bob Vin, your city engineer. I have an answer to your question about traffic. So the project's estimated to generate a total of 62 trips in the morning peak hour and 75 in the PM peak hour. The existing levels of service at the adjacent intersections, as measured before COVID, At Railroad and Livermore was level service E in the morning and D in the evening, and Railroad and L is C in the morning and D in the evening. And when you add the project traffic to that, it adds literally less than 1 second of delay in the analysis to any of those intersections.
Right. Thank you.
And then just catching up before you move on to the next commissioner, if I may, Mr. Chairperson, just following up on Commissioner Branning's question on open space. And again, these are, these are numbers based on a concept plan that PlaceWorks put together and later looked at in the 9212 report. So anyways, the PlaceWorks plan had an open space amount measured from the outside of their sidewalks, outside edge of their sidewalks of about 27,775 square feet. The Eden proposal is for 31,212 or so. So the measured from about using the same sort of parameters there. So the increase was about 3,500 square feet from the concept plan in terms of open space provision.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart. Okay, moving on to Vice Chairperson, or Commissioner Stein, you were finished, correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to Vice Chairperson Dunbar.